Today, food is a very prominent aspect of people's everyday lives, and within that aspect there comes recipes. Whether they are in the form of conversation, written down in a celebrity cookbook, printed off on the internet, or made up, they help people understand food that may have never come across. However, there is more to recipes than simplicity of learning. They engage with themes, concepts, and theories such as feminism, gender roles, racism, health, body shaming, and so much more. When we got the assignment to choose a recipe and present it to the class, I was extremely excited because I immediately thought of my Nana's gnocchi and tomato sauce recipe. In my family, food has always been a big part about where we come from. My grandparents were both born in Naples, which is a little town in Italy. They were always very proud of their culture and where they come from. So when they got married in 1963 and moved to Thunder Bay, they wanted to keep as much of that culture as possible, which includes cooking. And when I was little, I spent the summers with my grandparents. And during those months, I learned so much, not just about food, but about culture as well. My nonno had a very large garden filled with lots of fruits and vegetables like tomatoes, zucchinis, eggplants, and my nonna was constantly using those to her advantage because she loved to use fresh vegetables in all of her recipes, including her tomato sauce. Which is why I chose this specific recipe to present to the class. This recipe is something I only make on occasion because it requires a lot of effort. I usually only make it when I'm home on reading week or on Christmas or any other holiday because it takes too much time. I'm usually busy with classes and don't want to spend an hour to make dinner when I can just throw something together. In a sense, this dish really represents my family in its entirety. When it comes to the review questions, it's hard to comprehend because it's not a commercial recipe made by someone like Bobby Flay or Chef Ramsay. It was made by my grandmother, who taught it to my mom, who taught it to me, and so on. This recipe gets passed through generations by being shown firsthand what to do. There is really no step-by-step process. That's how I learned, that's how my mom learned, that's how my nonna learned, etc. And that's how I want the next person to learn. So I made a video to show. For the potato gnocchi, all you're going to need is potatoes, flour, and water. For the sauce, all you're going to need is a quarter cup of olive oil, 2 crayons of crushed tomatoes, 2 cups of water, an onion, 2 cloves of garlic, and a pinch of all these spices, which is parsley, oregano, and thyme. So with the potatoes whole and not peeled, you're going to fill a pot with some water and some salt and boil the potatoes over high heat for 30 to 40 minutes or until tender. While those potatoes are boiling, you can actually start on the sauce. For that, you're going to grab a saucepan and heat the oil over a medium-high heat. Finally, chop the onions and garlic and saute until they are translucent. After that, you're going to add the water, crushed tomatoes, and spices. Stir it all together and then season with salt and pepper. Bring that to a simmer and cook until the sauce is thickened, which will take about an hour to an hour and a half. To check if your potatoes are done, you're going to pierce them with a fork, and if they are tender throughout, you are going to drain them and place them into a bowl. When the potatoes are cool enough to handle, you are going to peel them, and then with a fork, mash it up until you get the consistency of mashed potatoes. To actually form the dough, you're going to need to flour a flat surface station and knead the potatoes together over that surface, adding flour as you knead the potatoes, until you reach a smooth dough-like consistency. You won't necessarily need to use all the flour, so if you have leftover, don't worry about it. Once you have your dough, you're going to cut it into 4 sections and roll each one into a cylinder-like string shape until it reaches the diameter of about your index or middle finger. After that, you're going to want to cut the actual gnocchi pieces by cutting those strands of dough into small bite-sized pieces. I would say about a ½ inch, but I measure with the knuckle lines. Shaping the actual gnocchi, traditionally you're supposed to use a gnocchi board. It kind of looks like a paddle with ridges down the sides, but we're going to use a fork because we don't have one of those. You're going to get the gnocchi on the fork in between your thumb and index finger, and with a slight rolling motion, press the gnocchi against the fork. You should have a nice spiralized formation that looks like the ones that I've just been showing. Now that the gnocchi is formed, you're going to fill a pot with water and a generous amount of salt. I use the same pot, you can use a different one if you like, it's up to you. You're going to bring the water to a boil, and then drop the gnocchi into the water to cook. It really should only take about a minute or 2, and when they float to the top, they're ready to go. You're going to want to skim them out of the water with a spoon, drain them, and then serve. And that is how you make my nonna's potato gnocchi and homemade tomato sauce. When it comes to the view and how good this dish is for you, it's not the healthiest thing you'll ever eat. But if you compare it to a fast food burger or a pizza, yeah, it's healthy. But if you compare it to a salad or roasted chicken and vegetables, it doesn't look too good. It's good to consider what healthy eating actually is. I mean, how would you know if you never stopped to actually define it? A good example can be the old Canadian Food Guide. It did not do a healthy diet justice. It had a number of servings that someone would have in a day, which was inaccurate. And grains were at the top of the list of your consumption. Again, not accurate. With the new food guide, it has more room for people that want to live healthier lifestyles. It shows fruits and vegetables, proteins, lots of water, and whole grains. So in the context of gnocchi, I think it's a potato, so it's vegetable, it's healthy. After doing some research to see how good a potato actually is for you, I found this picture. It states that a potato is completely fat-free, a great source of protein, natural, so it's good for your dietary fiber, it's a good source of minerals, has no cholesterol, and is rich in carbohydrates and energy. But there are some cons to potatoes as well. Potatoes have high starch content, which classifies it as a complex carb, and eating them in moderation is the best idea. The glycemic index for these potatoes raise your blood sugar levels really high, so diabetics are often advised to stay away from potatoes. Gnocchi is not really a good source of nutritional value because of the fact that it is just potatoes and flour, so I would recommend definitely only eating it once in a while. Looking at the recipe economically, it can be considered a cheap dish to make. I went to Walmart and got my potatoes and flour for less than $5. Exactly, it was $4.15. Then when I came home to make the tomato sauce, I mostly had all the stuff in my kitchen already, but you can really buy all the stuff for under $10. 2 kinds of crushed tomatoes, some spices, an onion, and some garlic won't really take enough to break your bank. Making your own sauce can also be cost effective because if you don't use it all from one dish, you can freeze it and use it again. Taking a turn into the geographical point of view, this recipe comes from all around the world. After doing some research, I actually found that the potatoes come from Peru, dating back to 25,000 BC. Then after the Spanish conquest of the Incan Empire, the Spanish introduced potatoes to the Europeans. Then with the ingredient of flour, the wheat seeds itself date back to 6000 BC. But the Romans were actually the first ones to grind the seeds. Then in 1879 in London, the first steam mill was created. While the ingredients of gnocchi go back to a time before Christ, the actual origin of potato gnocchi only goes back to the 17th century, well after Spanish explorers brought it to the Europeans. Then, in the 19th century, a man by the name of Pellegrino Artusi, the grandfather of Italian cuisine, made a recipe of potato gnocchi and published it, in exactly the same way that we see it today. Observing the recipe in a gendered aspect, it can be said that the preparation of this recipe is very sexist. Comparing it with Italian culture and my backstory, it shows it in full effect. In Italian culture, women did the dominant amount of cooking, and this was true to my family as well. My nonna cooked more than my nonno did because he worked a lot, and then when he would get home, my nonna would just cook for him automatically. My nonna's family is the one that made this recipe, and that's how she had it. She'd cook it for my nonno when he would get home from work, and then pass it down to my mother, who made it for my father, and now I'm the one that has it. But the fact is, these gender roles that are dominant in this recipe are not the way it should be done today. In the days of my grandparents, this was the norm. That's how people were treated, and that's how women and men were viewed. But in today's 21st century culture, that should not be the case. Cooking and recipes should be able to be shown to all genders and all types of people, which is why this can be tied in to race and ethnicity. This recipe has a general readership towards Caucasians, specifically with European backgrounds. It is essentially a recipe made by a European, made for Europeans to use, which in its own way can be seen as a type of discrimination to other cultures. Food is supposed to be a unifying aspect in life that makes people come together. It should not be a way of segregating other cultures. To wrap this up, in this class, we learned so much. We are going to learn so many different recipes and how it relates to gender, health, sociology, and our lives. Everything has their own story, and I'm so glad I got to share mine with you.